Hello, I'm baking bread, and I found a really cool old Welsh story. It's called The Night of the Blood Red Plume. It's by a woman named Anne Swansea. It was written around the 19th century, and it's really fascinating. It starts off sort of as a ghost story in that manner, and then it works its way over into a little bit of a chivalric romance, and then has a nice twist at the end that turns it more into a gothic horror. It's really fun, and the commentary it makes on, let's say, relationships and love and things like that make a lot of sense from the little bit that the author tells us about Anne Swansea's background in the book that I'm reading from called Celtic Weird Tales of Wicked Folklore and Dark Mythology. So here's a short story for you. Stay, pilgrim, whither wentst thou? Cold is the north wind that plays around the mountains, heart-chilling the snow that's wafted across the moor. Still, bleaker blows the blast, cutting, keen and freezing as the grey mist of evening falls upon the vales. Frozen is the path that winds through yon forest. Upon leafless trees hangs the winter's hoary frost, and cheerless the bosom of him doomed to wander along the long path in such a night as this. Turn thee, pilgrim, and bend thy step to Rhuddlan's ruined walls, where thou mayst, undisturbed, waste the gloomy night, and take the morning to enjoy the road. Pious hermit, know'st thou not from dusky eve till ruin of morn that tortured spirits in yon castle will rove? E'en now the blood runs chill in my veins while I do think on what I've seen. Such groans have met my ears, such sights my eyes, and screams and riotous laughs mingled with the winds that whistled through the broken arches of the courts. E'en now the sweat of terror dews my brow, and languid beats my heart. Say, didst thou penetrate the hall? I did, and on the hearth some dried leaves to warm my shivering frame. I spread my wallet's fare upon the ground, with joyful heart began to merry make. But angry spirits broke upon my glee, and fearful noises hailed my livid cheek. Instantly I dropped upon my trembling knee, and told my beads. But the screams increased, a ray of flame shot across the room, and before me stood a warrior in complete armor clad. His casque was down, and above his brow there waved a blood-red plume. No word he spake, but looked upon me with earnestness. His eye was as the slue black, and as the basilisk's fascinating. His cheek was wan and death-like. I would have fled, but my feet seemed chained to the ground, and my heart feared to beat against my bosom. At this moment I heard a female voice that loudly sounded in the hall. "I come, Erilda," cried the red-plumed knight, and instantly vanished. Again were the screams repeated, and showers of blood fell upon the marble flooring on which I stood. My veins were filled with icicles from my heart, but, rendered desperate by fear in the midst of the most horrible howlings, I flew, and the expiring embers of my fire, casting a faint light, guided me along the courts through which I darted with the rapidity of lightning. Venerable hermit, again I dare not trust myself in Rhuddlan's walls. I've opposed my bosom to the Saxon sword, and never trembled. I have braved dangers for my country, and was never known to tremble, but I dare not face the spirits of the angry Cleawed. The hermit smiled. Thou seest yon rock, which threatening hangs above the river, which rippling along now laves against its broken sides. In the bosom of that rock I dwell. Peace is my inmate. My cell is humble, but hospitable, and in its lap the weary pilgrim has often found repose. Rest thou with me this night, to share it, friend, and eke my frugal meal. Holy Father, with joy I follow you. Hunger and fatigue sore oppress me, and my wearied limbs almost refuse their wonted office. The venerable hermit conducted the wearied pilgrim to his cell, which was clean. His meal was wholesome. The pilgrim ate of the frugal repast, and a crystal water, springing from the rock, was the beverage on which the man of piety regaled. This was proffered in a rudely carved wooden bowl to his guest, who drank and felt relieved. He now drew his stool near the hearth on which the faggot blazed, and the hermit, to beguile the moments, and remove the fear which occupied his companion's breast, thus related of the knight of the blood-red plume, and the fair Erilda. High on the walls of Rhuddlan waved the black flag of death. Loud the bell of the neighbouring priory tolled the solemn knell, which every vale re-echoed round, and the sad response floated to the ear through every passing gale. The monks, in solemn voice, sung a mass for the everlasting repose of the deceased. 1,000 tapers illumined the chapel, and bounteously was the dole distributed to the surrounding poor. The evening blast was keen. The grey mist circled the mountain's craggy brow, and thin flakes of snow beat in the traveller's face, while cold and shivering airs wafted his cloak aside. Sir Reswick the hardy heard, as he advanced, the echo of the distant bell, and spurring his mettled steed, with heart harbouring many fears, pursued his course fleetly through the forest. "You speed, Sir Knight," cried a voice in his ear. "Egberta dies." Reswick turned pale. "Egberta's bosom's cold," continued the voice, "and vain will be your sighs." The knight, in dismay, checked his horse and inclined his head to whence he thought the sound proceeded. But nothing met his eye. All was vacant before him. Only the quivering bough, fanned by the breeze, was heard. Rather alarmed, he set spurs to the sides of his steed. Still, the snow was drifted in his face. Night was now ushered to the heavens, and it was with difficulty he could maintain the path that branched through the forest. The web-winged bat brushed by his ear in her circular flight, and the ominous screech owl straining her throat proclaimed the dissolution of the deceased. Sir Reswick heaved a sigh. A melancholy thought stole across his brain, and, arriving at the banks of Clwyd, he beheld with trembling the many tapers in the priory of Rhuddlan, and heard more distinctly the solemn bell. "Egberta is no more," cried the voice that had before accosted him. "Egberta is in heaven." The knight turned round, but beholding no one, and agonized by the prediction, again he roused his steed, and flew pale and breathless to the castle. He blew the loud horn suspended at the gate of Twyr Salod, the strong tower which stands upon the banks of the river, and the loud blast echoing in the courts aroused the ominous bird that had alighted on its battlements, who, flapping her heavy wings, resumed her flight, uttering a wild, discordant scream. The portal was opened to receive him, and Sir Reswick entered through a long range of vassals, habited in mournful weeds. "Is the prediction true, then?" he exclaimed, and rushing to the apartment of Egberta, found her cold and breathless. The colour that once adorned her cheek was faded. Her eyes were shrouded, and her lips became more pale from whence the last breath had so lately issued. A serene smile mantled her countenance. Her locks were carefully bound in rose bands. Her corpse was prepared for the earth, and 2 monks sat on each side of her, offering up their holy prayers for her repose. Sir Reswick, overcome by this unexpected sight, with a groan, fainted upon the couch. Some servants had attended him from the hall, conveyed him, in a state of insensibility, to his chamber, and the next day the virtuous Egberta was deposited in the chapel of the castle. Maidens strewed the path with flowers, along which their sainted lady was borne, and some monks from the neighbouring priory sung a solemn dirge over her, bareheaded and with their arms crossed upon their bosoms. The fair Erilda, with her own hands, decked the person of her mother with flowers, and those flowers were moist with a daughter's tears. A requiem, chanted by the monks, in which the maiden joined, closed their ceremony, and Erilda, with oppressed grief, returned to the castle. Sir Reswick, whose grief would not permit him to attend the funeral rites, pressed the affectionate girl to his bosom. They sought mutual consolation in each other. Reswick the Hardy was the friend and favourite of his prince. He had fought in all the wars of his country since the first moment he could hurl a spear. Victory had always attended his arms. But now his beard was silvered with age. Peace was restored to the land, as he had hoped at Rhuddlan in the bosom of Egberta to pass away his few remaining years. Blidlin ap Glenn had united in himself by conquest the sovereignty of Gwynedd or North Wales with Paz, and had thus terminated a war that had long threatened destruction to either nation. With pleasure did Wales observe her implacable enemy, the English struggling to overcome a foreign foe. Bloody were the battles fought with William of Normandy, surnamed the Bastard. And with secret satisfaction did Blidid ap Glenn, a silent spectator, see either army reduced and weakened in sanguinary contest. Sir Reswick had, by his bloody Edberg, by his beloved Egberta, from whose fond arms the war had often torn him, and who, in his last absence, being attacked by a sudden and violent illness, in a few days expired, had only one daughter. To Erilda he now looked forward for future happiness. She was as beautiful as the morn. Roseate health sat upon her smiling cheek, meekness and charity in her lustre beaming eye. Her teeth were as so many snowdrops regularly even, her breath like the dewed rosebud of glowing fragrance. A dimple revelled playfully near her mouth, and the rich ringlets of her yellow hair floated carelessly on her fine curved shoulders. Upon her snowy breast she wore a ruby cross, suspended by a gold chain, and down her taper limbs the dazzling folds of her white garments flowed. Erilda was not more beautiful in person than in mind, for as lovely a bosom as nature ever formed encased a heart, and rich with every virtue. She was the subject of universal admiration. All tongues were lavish in her praise, and many suitors came to ask her hand. But, though extremely sensitive, no one, as yet, claimed an interest in her heart. The warm shaft of love had not pierced her glowing veins, and gay and affable to all, reserved to few, she preserved that freedom which the lover cannot retain. The loss of her mother imparted a melancholy to her cheek that rendered her far more lovely. Sir Reswick indulged in grief, and the castle was one scene of mourning. On the brow of the rock that o'erlooks the angry clivid, which rolls beneath, the poorer vassals and dependents of Rhuddlan every evening came to receive the bounty of their young mistress. It was these excavations in the rock that echoed the soft plaintive notes of her melodious harp. On this rock she sung, and the spirits of the murmuring river were charmed. As they lay in their oozy bed with soft pleasing strains, the billows ceased to roll in admiration, and Zephyrus drew back his head in mute attention to the rapturous lay. Once, when the return of twilight was echoed in the heavens by the rich crimson streaks and blushing gold that occupied the vast expanse of sky, and Erilda accompanied with her voice the trembling harp, a warrior knight mounted on a barbed steed and sable armor clad, with a blood-red plume waving on his brow, approached the spot from which the sound proceeded. Erilda, on hearing the advance of the horse's feet, turned hastily about, and, with modest courtesy, welcomed the knight, who had thus obtruded on her privacy. There was something in his gait and appearance that struck her with awe, and the unknown, dismounting from his steed, occupied a seat beside her. Again she struck upon the trembling chords with fearful hand. The stranger sighed as he gazed upon her, and when her eye met his, she withdrew it, blushing to the ground. The shade of night approached, and misty fogs obscured the starry sky. "Sir Knight," she cried, with a courteous smile, while an unusual palpitation thrilled through her heart, of admiration mixed with fear. "Rhuddlan's hospitable walls are ready to receive you, and no warrior passes her warlike towers without partaking and acknowledging the munificence of Reswick the Hardy." "Fair lady," replied the unknown, "the hospitality of the gallant chieftain, so famed, is not unknown to me, but I must onward on my journey, nor taste the bounty which all admire." "Sir Knight, that is not courteous." "Lady, adieu, it must not be. I live in hopes that we shall meet again." Saying this, he pressed her hand to his lips, and mounting his steed, flew with the rapidity of the winds along the shadowed plain that stood before her. His horse, so fleet, seemed to skim across the ground, and in an instant he was borne from her sight. Arilda was astonished. There was a wildness in the jet-black eye of the unknown that, while it fascinated her, alarmed her. A beautiful colour tinged her cheek, but not of that nature to which she was accustomed. His locks were black and sleek, his figure so noble and commanding, his voice, though harmony itself, still conveyed a hollow sound that was not pleasing. In short, his whole appearance, while it charmed to admiration, filled her with a kind of tremor, and she returned to the palace of Rhuddlan, charmed, at the same time awed, with the martial appearance of the stranger. "What majesty in his countenance!" she exclaimed to herself. "What nobleness in his demeanour! And what melancholy seems to occupy his soul that dims the sparkling lustre of his jet-black eye, and clouds those animating features otherwise beaming with cheerfulness! Surely such dejection is not natural in him. No, some secret praise upon his heart. Perhaps love, which, as I have heard bards relate, feeds upon the roseate hue of health, gives languor to the eye, paleness to the cheek, despoils the heart of its manhood, yet reduces firmness to trepidity, and poisons the noble mind with weakness that are engendered by timidity." Arilda sighed. Sir Riswick met her as she was seeking her chamber, and the good old man bore the resemblance of his grief upon his fettered cheek. But he endeavoured to be cheerful, and with an assumed smile he conducted her to the supper hall. Arilda vainly attempted to be gay, but the variety of thought which occupied her brain, the soul-inspiring song of the family bard, charmed not her ear, who, at the board, when the gay goblet circulated the table, raised high his tuneful voice to the sublimest pitch, in commemoration of deeds of other days, and sung of triumph and of glorious war. Arilda, whose heart was affected by another subject, was not moved with the sweet sounds of the trembling heart, nor participated that emotion which the song of patriotism inspired in the breasts of the auditors. Had the theme been love, the air had been plaintive as the ring-dove's tender tale. Arilda's soul had wasted in the strain and owed the power of music when in melody with her feelings. Affectionately imprinting a kiss upon the bearded cheek of Sir Riswick, attended by her page, she bade adieu to the night, and, retiring to her couch, attempted to lull those wild and troubled thoughts that agitated and depressed her. But the blood-plumed knight in her slumbers stood before her. His graceful form, his pensive and melancholy countenance, she pictured to herself, and sighs of regret when she awoke she found the unreal image vanished, stole from her heaving breast. With the first dawn of morning, Arilda arose and flew to the monastery of Rhuddlan to offer up her daily prayers. The holy father confessor gave her absolution on declaration of her errors, and again she sought the much-loved spot where she had met the unknown. She looked toward the path he had taken the preceding evening. He no longer occupied it, and, seating herself upon the rock, she played an air, soft and melodious as the strains of Philomel, but, dissatisfied with her execution, she turned the instrument aside. Her voice, she conceived, wanted its usual sweetness. The harp was out of tune, and her fingers, lingering upon the strings, damped the swelling. Arilda sighed, and sighed so deep that the echo from the excavated rock returned them to her ear. At length, the tear glistened in her eye. Why am I thus concerned for the wandering unknown, whom chance perhaps conducted to this spot for a first and only time, who ere now is leagues distant from my sighs, and who does not entertain one thought of me? Away, hope, thou delusive image from my bosom! I never shall behold him more. My heart must harbour no such sights. Saying this, with the firmness of resolution, she turned her step toward the castle. Sir Riswick was preparing for the chase. The hounds and hawks were abroad. All was noise and confusion, and Arilda consented to make one of the throng. Buckling on her breast the mantle of green, and slinging across her shoulder the bow and arrow quiver, mounted on a cream-backed palfrey, she joined them. The adjacent forest echoed back the huntsman's loud horns, and the affrighted deer pricked up their ears to the well-known blast. The yell of dogs sounded in the glens, the loud halloo succeeded, and nimbly o'er the bogs and marshes bounded the fleet object of their sport. It was noon when Sir Ryswick ordered his vassals to strike their tents upon the plain, and after refreshing them with a rich repast, again they repaired to renew the chase. The ripe mead in a golden goblet was presented to the fair Erilda, who in the midst of her damsels looked like the goddess of the wood. And Sir Ryswick drank from the hairless horn the soul-reviving crew. Soon again the panting deer pursued up the craggy cliffs, through streams and valleys, over the heath, across the moor, and across the mazy forest. Erilda startled a speckled doe from the bosom of the dark glen, and drawing an arrow to her head in the silver bow, pierced her in the heart. Though wounded, the animal made good her flight, and darted away like lightning. The heroic huntress fleetly pursued, while the horns and hounds echoed from another part of the plain. Long did the doe maintain her speed, and kept in sight with the arrow in her breast, until the pale-faced moon appeared emerging from a cloud and silvering the glassy lake. At length the wounded animal dropped. It instantly expired. Erilda dismounted her steed, and now she first discovered herself to be absent from her train, and at an hour when angry demons ride upon the air and mutter mischief. Cold winds wafted her brown hair aside, and fast descending the grey mist of evening. In vain Erilda listened to catch the halloo of the huntsman. No longer the horn sounded in the vale. All was drear and silent, save the hollow murmuring of the wind, forcing its passage, sighing through the trees. Almost fainting with fear, she leaned upon her bow. She endeavored to blow the horn that was suspended at her breast, but it fell from her grasp, and the bow shrunk from her hand. At length, summoning more fortitude, she remounted her steed, and not knowing which road to take, gave her horse the reins, and trusted herself to the protection of her household spirit. Away flew the impatient steed through the forest, over hill and dale. The turf trembled beneath his hoofs, and the white foam frothed his extended nostrils. On an instant, the bell of a neighboring monastery sounded in the gale, and blazing torches were seen waving through distant parts of a wood that lay before. "Hilly-ho-ho!" cried the huntress, with hope animating her bosom. "Hilly-ho-ho!" But her voice returned responsive to her, and the flaming brands disappeared. Still she pursued the path, and fleetly flew the cream-backed palfrey on which she rode. Now again the huntsman's horn was heard winding at a great distance, and now the approaching clank of horses' hoofs convinced her that the attendants of the chieftain, her father, were in pursuit of her. Erilda, checking her steed, awaited their coming up with her, but those in pursuit took a different route, and the sounds dying away. As the attendants receded, all was again hushed. At length, weary of suspense, she proceeded, and turning the angle of a jutting rock that bulged in the fertile cleuid, she observed a horseman slowly parading its banks. Pensive was his face. His right hand rested on a battle-axe. His left held the reins of a nut-brown courser. His soul seemed occupied by melancholy, his brain to be distracted by tormenting thoughts. Erilda advanced toward him, fixing her blue eyes upon his cheek. To her astonishment, recognized the stranger knight of the blood-red plume. His visor was up, and melancholy tinged his whole countenance. A sigh, half-suppressed, trembled on his lips. Despondency seemed to suppress his heart, that shed a transitory gloom over every feature and preyed upon that energy of mind, which his interesting eye betrayed as certainly possessing. Erilda, unable to curb her impetuous steed, who reared upon its hind legs, snorted in rage, called to the knight, who, wrapped in thought, observed her not. "Good stranger," cried the daughter of haughty Rhuddlan's chieftain, "I throw myself under your protection. Conduct that strayed Erilda to Rhuddlan's halls, and the blessings of a distracted parent shall be yours." "Divine daughter of the first of chieftains," replied the knight, eagerly grasping his horse's reins, "I am subject to your commands. My life shall be to your service." Erilda, smiling, gave him her hand, which he pressed respectfully to his lips. Proceeding, the lofty turrets of Rhuddlan appeared in view. The pale moon, shedding her eyes on its stark battlements, reflected them to the cleuid, in which soft billows rippled beneath the mount on which it stood. Numberless torches were seen glaring in the hands of the disconsolate attendants of the chieftain, who, in the agony of grief, dispersed them round the country in search of her. All was bustle, and no sooner did she appear among them than the loud shouts rent the ear, and they flew to bear welcome tidings to Sir Ryswick. The stranger knight conducted her across the courts, and her fond father, impatient to clasp her to his arms, hastened toward her. Erilda fell upon his bosom, and the tear of joy dropped from the old man's beard upon her shoulder. The knight, in his turn, received the caresses of the venerable chieftain, who, boundless in his joy, would have lavished upon him empires had he them to command. "Tell me, sir knight," cried Riswick, "to whom am I indebted for the restoration of Erilda to my aged arms? Let me fall upon my knees at his feet and bless him." "Hospitable chieftain, my name is Wertwald, a forlorn and suffering wanderer. The world contains no home to shelter me, no friend to welcome me. But though sorrows oppress my heart, I am ever ready to give joy to others. Erilda is once more yours," he added with a sigh, and, bowing his head, was about to depart. "Nay, stranger, this night you must share that joy which you have imparted to our breast, and make Rydland your residence." "Your pardon," cried the knight. "My envious fortune denies that I should taste of pleasure. I must away, ere the stars fade on the horizon."
"Wertwald," returned Erilda, "the maid whom you have protected entreats you stay. Upon her knee entreats it. Do not dispirit our festivity by your departure. Come, let me conduct you to the marble hall." The knight, overpowered by their entreaties, at length yielded, and Erilda, taking him by the hand, introduced him to the festive board where sat the harpers tuning their strings, awaiting the approach of the chieftain and his guests. Wertwald appeared struck with this dazzling splendor of the hall that had regaled princes. Rich crimson tapestry hung down the walls, and festoons fringed with gold, between pillars of the fairest marble disposed at equal distances, supporting cornices of polished silver. The carved ceiling displayed emblematical devices of war and of the chase. In one part Diana was painted with her bow, another Caractacus engaging the Romans. Erilda conducted the knight to a cedar stool, covered with crimson and edged with gold, at the table on which were profusely scattered carved goblets, sumptuously embossed, and flowing with ripe mead. The harpers, during the repast, raised their voices in praise of the ancestors of Riswick, and regularly traced his descent in bardic song, describing each great feat his fathers had performed. And now, the midnight bell sounding, dissipated their mirth. The bards were dismissed, and Wertwald was led to a couch by one of the attendants. After saluting the fair hand of Erilda, which she offered to him in token of her favor, the morning dawned unusually splendid. The early dew sparkled on the grass blade, and the effulgent sun rising tinted the horizon with his gay beams. Gentle was the air that played around the mountains, sweet and odoriferous were the scented gale. The river Clwyd, timidly flowing, fearful lest it should interrupt the calmness that prevailed, was scarcely seen to move, and Erilda, whose troubled thoughts the preceding evening had denied her rest, hastened to the delightful rock where she first beheld the stranger, Wertwald, there to indulge in sighs, and those thoughts that, while they pained, pleased. The solitary spot afforded her an opportunity to indulge in the melancholy of her mind. Here she could sit and gaze with pensive eye upon the calm waters as they laved against the shore, and involve her brain in a chaos of bewildering reflection, unobserved by anyone. Erilda never knew till now what it was to love, never knew till now what sighs the absence of him or her we love creates. And now she felt the pains, was unable to sustain them. The red-plumed knight was master of her heart and of her fate. Violent was the passion that raged in her bosom, threatening to consume her by a slow, lingering fire, for it appeared impossible the passions could be gratified. Seated upon an arm of the rock that overhangs the Clwyd, tears flowing down her lovely cheeks, agitated by similar thoughts, and overcome by weight of her emotions, weary, not having tasted of repose the preceding night, she sunk into a slumber, her head reclined upon her lily arm. Wertwald left the castle to taste of the refreshing air ere the baron descended from the chamber, or the loud bell summoned them to breakfast. His feet, as if by instinct, led him to the spot where first Erilda had attracted his notice. How much was he astonished to behold the lovely maiden in a sweet sleep. He stood a while to observe her, and the tenderest sensation thrilled through his whole soul, Her auburn locks played carelessly upon her temples. Her blue eyes were shrouded with dark lashes. The tint of the carnation was displayed upon her cheek. A perfect ruby color were her lips. The white rose leaf through which runs the blue enamelled vein was not more fair than her forehead, or more sweet than her breath. The soft air that played around her wafted the thin gauze aside that shadowed her snowy bosom, and revelled beauties which monarchs on beholding would have languished to enjoy. Wertvold, transported in the ecstasy of passion, dropped upon his knee and imprinted a kiss upon her cheek. Erilda at this moment awoke, and the knight, conscious of the crime he had committed, drew back, abashed and trembling. Erilda was alike confused, and Wertvold, seizing this opportunity, clasped hold of her hand with fervour, and pressing it between his, exclaimed, "Lovely Erilda, pardon the presumption which your beauty has inspired. If 'tis a crime to adore you, then I am most criminal. But I bow to my fate. Doomed to be unhappy, I willingly resign myself, the victim of cruel fortune." "Say, Sir Knight," cried the embarrassed Erilda, letting her hand rise to help him from the ground, "why are you thus persecuted? Repose your sorrows in my bosom. Indeed, you will find in me one much interested in you. Erilda from her heart pities you." "And does Erilda pity me?" he returned, rising and assuming a seat by her side. "Oh, welcome, ye sorrows, for henceforth, mingled with your bitter tears, ye convey a pleasure in the thought that she would, whom all the world adores, feels for my sufferings. The scalding tear shall no longer flow without its balm. The arrow of anguish, while it sounds, shall on its poison-tipped point convey a healing balm to my soul. But say, Sir Knight, why is your fate involved in mystery? Lend me your confidence, make me mistress of your secret. My bosom shall be its prison-house, and so tenacious will I be in retaining it that even to myself I will not dare to whisper it." "Oh, lady, could I burst the fetters that chain my tongue to secrecy, I should enjoy a luxury in my grief, but no, it is forbid. You behold in me a houseless wanderer against whom the vengeance of heaven is imprecated, doomed for a term to be a solitary inhabitant of the earth, with no settled home to shelter me, no friend to console me, no one to whom I can confide my sorrows." "Well," cried Erilda with impatience, "lady, I dare reveal no more. The cause must remain unknown." Erilda could scarce conceal her agitation. "And when," with a tremulous voice she added, "will the term expire that frees you from your misery?" "Then, when a virgin shall be found, of noble birth, and honour speckless as the mountain's dazzling snow, whose beauty shall be the theme of courts and palaces, whose virtue shall be the admiration of those whom, with parent bounty, she has fostered, whose hand shall be urged by knights of rank and enterprise, who shall withstand the temptation of wealth and power, equipage and title, who shall sincerely love me for myself alone, and brave all dangers to arrive at the haven of my arms." Erilda turned pale. The colour on her cheek flew, and her whole frame became agitated. At this moment the loud bell of the castle tolled the breakfast hour, and endeavouring to reassume her wonted spirits, "Come," she cried gaily, "we have wasted much time in idle talk." Wertwold lent her his arm, and they proceeded to Rutland. The young knight, at their earnest solicitation, consented to remain at the castle a few days, and various sports were devised to amuse him. Nothing was spared to make him forget his griefs, but, in the midst of splendid gaiety, Wertwold himself, melancholy, clouded his brow and stole the roseate colour of his cheek, sat still. On the second evening, as the last rays of the sun were reflected upon the lakes, and the misty crown of twilight circled the mountain's peak, Erilda, whose bosom was tortured by the love she bore the unhappy Wertwold, strayed in the garden adjoining the castle. The day had been rather sultry, and attended by her little foot-page, she made towards the fountain with an intent to bathe. She had already unloosed her hair when she observed, extended upon the yellow sands, Wertwold. He was in a sound sleep, and, approaching with tremulous steps, she hung over him with an eye brimful of tears. "Unhappy knight," she cried, "where shall be found the maid who can assuage the anguish of thy bosom and restore to its former peace? Where shall that maid be found, speckless as thou hast described, who will renounce every pretension for thee? Alas, alas! I let me not buoy myself up with faint hopes. Wertwold, shall yet be happy, but Arilda will forever be miserable. Yes, yes. Some more happy maid than thou, Arilda, will gain the heart of Wertvold, and tear the bond asunder that dates his misery. Faster flowed her tears, her agony became more acute, and clasping her hands together, she sunk down by his side. Her eyes were pensive, fixed on his that were shrouded in sleep. And wrapped in ecstasy, she watched every breath that swelled his bosom escaped his lips. How beautiful did he appear! As he lay reclined upon the ground, what a dew sparkled on his lips, and what a colour revelled upon his cheeks! His jet black hair, on which the water drop from bathing glistened, clustered in silky curls around his head. He had laid aside his armour, and the true shape and mouldings from his manly limbs were visible. His neck and bosom were bare. They were of the most masculine beauty. "Ah, Arilda!" exclaimed he in his slumbers, "you alone can liberate my anguished heart. You alone can restore the smile to my fretted cheek. But you do not love me." "Hear it, heavens!" cried the enraptured maid. "Oh, Wertvold!" and fainted upon his bosom. The knight awoke from the violence of her fall, and he gazed upon her with astonishment. "Arilda!" he exclaimed. Bathing her temples with cold water, she soon revived. Her wild eyes were timidly revealed to the light, and as soon as she discovered herself in the arms of Wertvold, she gave a faint scream, and broke from his embrace. "Arilda!" cried the knight with fervour, "my fate is in your hands. Do with me as you please. You alone can avert my cruel destiny. From this moment I cease to hope or to despair." Arilda was in an agony insupportable. Tears choked her utterance, and pressing his hand between hers, she flew to conceal her anguish in another part of the garden. They met at the supper board, but she, feigning indisposition, begged leave to retire, and full early did the Baron and his guests press the downy pillow. In her chamber Arilda indulged her sighs. Sir Reswick had chosen the heir apparent of Wales for her future lord, and she well knew it was in vain to contest his choice. The chieftain loved the happiness of his child, but the love of aggrandizement he cherished in his bosom. He looked forward with fond delight to the time when Arilda might, with the partner of her pleasures, share the thrones of Gwynedd and Powys. A few days was to see the young prince at Rhuddlan. Preparations were making for his reception. Sir Reswick with pleasure beheld the nuptial day advancing, but Arilda viewed its approach with agony. The night was far advanced. Ere her trembled thoughts were invaded by sleep, yet, still maintaining their empire, they conjured up visions to the closed eyes. Arilda dreamed that her father, overpowered by his affections for her and her entreaties, yielded his consent to her union with Wertvold, and placed her hand in his. Transported, she threw her arms around her lover's neck. At this junction, awakening, she found the knight clasped in her embrace. Recoiling with horror from his arms, and recovering her senses, that were at first bewildered. "Away!" she cried in tone of terror. "Perfidious knight, leave me. Your conduct calls for my indignation. Oh, Wertvold! Was it possible for me to imagine you thus repay your hospitality you here experienced by invading in the midnight hour the chamber of me defenceless? Begone!" she added with a contemptuous frown, "ere I call my attendants and expose the serpent who repays the favour of Rhuddlan's lord with abusing his confidence." "Yet hear me, Arilda," returned the knight, "ere I am gone forever. I came but to gaze my last farewell on that lovely countenance that dooms me to everlasting misery. My neighing steed now waits at the castle gate, and I must bid these much-loved haunts adieu forever. Farewell, Arilda. Irresistible fate leads me hence, and oh, sometimes give a thought on him who, added to his agonies, harbours for you a fruitless passion." Wertvold paused. "Forever!" exclaimed Arilda. "Oh, Wertvold!" "Could my absence," continued the knight, "create one pang in your breast, though grateful would be the knowledge to my heart, still it would inflict a wound, Arilda, urging my brain to distraction when I paused on your unhappiness. Which way ever I turn, misery attends me. Endless sorrow is my bitter portion. That I am indifferent to Arilda creates another pang." "Oh, Wertvold!" cried the maid, sinking on his bosom, "I am yours, and yours alone." "Do not my ears deceive me?" cried the enraptured knight. "Does Arilda really love me? Will she renounce the world for me?" "The world? Yes," returned Wertvold, "and then shall my felicity dawn. Arilda must renounce everything to be mine, to share with me those transports which virtuous love creates." "You speak in mystery." Erilda must, with heroic fortitude, overcome every obstacle to our union, must place implicit confidence in my faith, sacrifice everything for me. The firm mind can stand unshaken on the stupendous rock, can smile upon the gulf beneath that which threatens to devour. So must the woman who would gain my arms. Wertvold, take this ring, Erilda. It is a charmed one, which, when breathed upon, brings me to your presence. Use it as you need me, and I fly, in obedience to your command, though at the extremity of the world. Yet stay, you leave me in doubt. Erilda must use her own discretion. I have not power to direct her. Farewell, he cried, pressing her to his bosom, instantly retired, leaving her lost in wonder and amazement. For a time she could barely believe her senses. Everything appeared as a dream before her eyes, but she, possessing the charming ring, and the deluding thought vanished, that told her the preceding scene was the mere fabrication of her imagination. At breakfast time she met with Sir Reswick, who was not a little surprised and angered with the abrupt disappearance of his guest. Erilda endeavoured to plead his case, urging that business of utmost import demanded his immediate attendance, and that to her he apologized. The generous chieftain was well satisfied with the excuse, although he had hoped Wertvold, in whose favour he was much interested, should have been present at the solemnization of Erilda's nuptials, which the 4th day was to see performed, according to a message which he had received from the young prince, who, impatient to call Erilda his bride, thus early appointed the day. Sir Reswick, with joy expressed in his countenance, imparted the news to his daughter, who, falling upon her knees, her cheeks bathed in tears, and grasping his hand, entreated him, as he considered her happiness, to forego his intentions. How? Cried the astonished baron. I shall never know happiness with a man whom my heart will not acknowledge for its lord, returned the afflicted Erilda. Oh, as you love my peace of mind, send back the prince. Erilda cannot be the bride of Morven. Another object has enchained her heart. How? Exclaimed the indignant baron. Does Erilda reject the heir to the throne of Wales? It would be criminal to my hand when another possesses my heart. Oh, my father, the happy Morven will find one more worthy of being his bride, one more closely in conjunction with his soul, who will return his fond affection with affection. Erilda, cried the venerable chieftain with firmness, I seek not to know him whom your heart has chosen. If you value my affection, Morven must be your future lord. If not, your father is lost to you forever. Thus saying, he retired, leaving the distracted maid overwhelmed with grief. Sir Reswick would not see her the rest of the day, and a messenger in the evening, coming to her chamber, bid her prepare on the morrow to receive Morven, who was expected at the castle, attended by a numerous retinue. Erilda, in an agony of distraction, threw herself upon the couch. Her tears more plenteously flowed to her relief, and eased those labouring sighs that swelled her agitated bosom. She, casting her eyes upon the magic ring that encircled her finger, pressed it to her lips, and her warm breath sullying the ruby that sparkled upon it. Instantly, the blood-red knight stood before her. I come, he cried, at your command, from the bosom of the vasty deep, to serve the mistress of my heart. Wertvold took a seat by her side. Erilda hung her head upon his shoulders. Her cheek was pale with weeping, her eyes languid and heavy. Oh, Wertvold, she exclaimed, this must be our last meeting. The son of Gwyn claims Erilda's hand, and even now is on the road to Rhuddlan to lead her to the bridal altar. And will Erilda yield her honour, then, at the sordid entreaties of avarice and pride? Will she prostitute herself, embittering the remainder of her days to gratify another's passion? Wertvold, you... O lady, the fond affection glowing my bosom has heaped a world of ruin in my heart. I see the gulf yawning at my feet. I see what tortures are preparing for me, and fly to meet my doom. It Erilda is who hurls me to destruction. It is Erilda who mocks my sighs, and points me to the spot where angry demons wait to glut them on my blood. But these inflictions I can brave, for she I love proves false. She who deceitfully sighed, I am yours, and yours alone. You amaze and terrify me. What tortures, what inflictions are those you dread? O Wertvold, do not keep me in suspense. Tell me who or what are you? Who I am, lady, must remain a secret. What I am, my warm sighs, my great affliction have revealed. Your lover, O Erilda, I am man with half his fortitude, man with all his weaknesses. Love animates and distracts my bosom, and she whom I wed must wed me. for myself alone. Fond Wertvold, I question you no more, and oh, how shall I convince you that my heart is yours, doomed as I am to misery and Morven? She fixed her languishing eyes upon his countenance. Wertvold paused. Arilda looked into the castle garden. The woodbine and honeysuckle climbed above her window, and a rose tree entwined itself with the odorous branches of the honeysuckle. Some sprigs hung pendant near the sashes of the casement, where the flower blowed and scented the air with its refreshing sweets. Wertvold eagerly slipped a spray that boasted a full-blown flower and a ripening bud, which he presented to Arilda. "Look you," he cried, "look on these flowers. The beauty of the one withers while the other ripens. Here we see a rich bloom upon the cheek of youth. What a glowing fragrance does its breath impart! How sweet is the dew that hangs upon the expanding leaf! How rich, how luxuriant, how captivating to the senses! Would not it be cruel to pluck this early bud ere it hath tasted the dew which now sparkles on its lip, and at the moment when it is about to enjoy the sweets which are prepared for early life? Lady, this new plucked bud in an hour shall perish. Its life shall fly its newly created bosom. The hand of man hath deprived it of succours, and ere it cease to charm it dies, unpitied, unrespected." Then, turning to the other, "This full-blown rose, whose shriveled leaf betrays a speedy dissolution, having tasted of all the pleasures life affords, and enjoyed them in their full sense, prepares to die. The morning sun, instead of cheering, shall wither its juiceless fibres. The flavour of its breath is fled. The falling dew animates it not. The airs are cold and freezing that play around it and plucked. It would not perish sooner were it left to wither upon the spray." "I do not understand you." "Lady, if one of these flowers must be torn from the branch of life, which would you sacrifice?" "The full blown." "Then live, Arilda, live to enjoy the tide of pleasure and of happiness." "Wertvold, your words convey a horrible meaning. My soul shudders at the thought." "What thought, Arilda? I ask you but to live. Is the thought mercenary? I ask you but to taste of those pleasures which he for whom you would sacrifice your happiness in person cannot enjoy. Sir Reswick has nearly numbered his years, and dissolution betrays its approach upon his cheek. His infirm limbs, his shriveled form, his silvery beard, his aged eye, like the full-blown rose, confirms a speedy termination of his life." Arilda fainted upon his bosom. His arms encircled her waist. Hers were entwined around his neck. The colour of returning life soon crimsoned her cheek. Her lips were pressed to his. The kiss exchanged imparted a mutual glow to the heart, and filled it with voluptuous thoughts. "Arilda is mine eternally," cried the knight. "I am yours forever," sighed the maid with half-fainting voice. "Tomorrow she will leave Rhuddlan for my arms." "Tomorrow I am yours." They parted, each transported with the warmth of passion, and the ensuing eve was to see Arilda preparing her flight from her paternal home. The next morning, Morven and his numerous retinue were heard upon their march across the mountain. Their martial clang of their warlike instruments was heard at a great distance, and some messengers preceding brought the early news of his approach and presence for the bride. The castle gates were thrown open to receive them. White flags waved upon the walls that were thronged with armed soldiers who owned Rhuddlan's powerful lord for their chieftain, and bards and harpers raised high their voices in praise of fair Arilda. Morven entered the castle amidst the acclamations of the generous people, who loudly testified their joy at his approach, and whose loud shouts rent the air. Sir Riswick received him with every demonstration of pleasure, and instantly conducted him to the presence of his daughter. Arilda, habited in robes of virgin white that flowed down her tapered limbs, in the midst of her maidens, welcomed him with a smile. She looked beautiful. Her cheeks were flushed with the ripe tincture of the rose. Her blue eyes beamed with expression. Her hair was tastefully disposed upon her forehead. Her silver beads flowed down her fine-shaped bosom. Morven saluted her with affability, for while the young prince was transfixed with wonder and admiration, her beauty far exceeded in his estimation the report that had reached his ear, and he looked with impatience for the moment that was to make her his bride. The day was spent in merry pastimes, but Arilda was depressed with fears. She trembled at the promise she had made to Wertvold, and more than once resolved to break it. The evening fast approached, and she grew more and more alarmed. At length the last rays of the declining sun were reflected upon the lake. The tinkling bell of the goatherds caught her ear. The much-dreaded time was arrived. Her heart fluttered in her bosom, and wild and unknowing what she did, she sought the harbour where she had promised to meet the unknown. Wertvold was already there. With eagerness he clasped her to his bosom, with unallayed passion pressed her lips to his. "O Arilda," he sighed, "do I hold you in my arms, and shall my present bliss be equalled by the future? Come," he continued, "let us hasten our departure. A coracle waits us on the cliff to waft us to the opposite shore." "Wertvold," exclaimed the affrighted maid, "I dare not. Do not tempt me. I must remain, and be the bride of Morven." "Perjured, Arilda, false, fleeting woman, is this your truth? Is this your constancy? Then farewell forever." "Yet stay," she cried, "one moment. Oh, Wertvold, do not leave me a prey to my own thoughts." "Will Arilda be mine?" "Yes, yes." "Voluntarily mine?" "Oh, yes," exclaimed the maid, unconscious of what she said, observing lights at the further end of the walk, and fearful lest they should discover her with the unknown. "Arilda will fly her paternal roof for Wertvold?" "Yes, yes." "Regardless of a father's tears and remonstrations?" "I am Wertvold's, and Wertvold's alone," she exclaimed, more alarmed by the nearer approach of the lights, "and no power on earth shall separate me from his arms." The knight of the blood-red plume smiled. It was a smile of satisfaction, and he placed in her hands a dagger. "Use it," he cried, "in self-defense alone. Where is Sir Resvick?" At this moment a number of torches were seen flaming down the walk. Sir Resvick was at the head of a party of servants, whose countenances were expressive of fear. "See," he cried, "they bend their steps this way. We shall be discovered." "Take this dagger," returned the knight, thrusting it into her hand. "How am I to use it?" exclaimed the maid in terror. "Sir Resvick advances. 'Tis him alone we have to fear. Plunge it in his bosom." "In the bosom of my father?" cried she with horror. "Wertvold, merciful heavens, do not my ears deceive me? Horror, horror! In the bosom of my father! Away, monster!" "Come to my arms, Arilda," exclaimed the knight. "I have proved your virtue. You are doubly dear to me." He pressed the trembling maid to his bosom. At this moment Sir Reswick entered the arbour. This way," cried Wertvold, and hurrying through a small outlet that led to the river, footsteps pursued them. Still Arilda held the dagger in her hand. The pale moonbeam silvered along the path, betrayed the shadow of person in pursuit, wrapped in a long cloak. "We are betrayed," cried Wertvold. "Our pursuer must die." "I see the coracle. It is at the shore," said Arilda, and at this moment someone seized her white robe from behind. "Plunge your dagger in his heart," cried Wertvold. "Hold your impious hand," returned a hollow voice. "Strike!" demanded the knight. "Stay, murderess." "Our safety pleads for his death," rejoined Wertvold. The hand of the pursuer now clasped Arilda's shoulder, who, disentangling herself in the rendered frantic, turned hastily around and plunged the dagger in her assailant's breast. The wounded man dropped upon the ground. "Cruel!" Arilda escaped his lips, and he instantly expired. "Hence God abandoned murderers," muttered the voice that had before arrested the arm of Arilda. "Fly to meet thy doom." "Hark!" cried the maid. "Heard you nothing? What voice was that?" Terror sat on her brow. Her lips were pale with fear. Her eyes looked wild and fiery. "I heard nothing but the wind sighing along the strand." "Do you hear nothing?" exclaimed she. "Merciful God! What have I done?" "Murderess! Oh, let me look on him I have slain." She approached the corpse, spite of the entreaties of Wertvold, and discovered, wrapped in a long cloak, the bleeding body of Sir Resvick. A crimson stream flowed from the fresh-made wound. His eyes were filmed and closed in death. His cheek was wan, his mouth wide and distended. "O God, my father!" exclaimed Arilda, "murdered by my hands," and fell fainting upon his bleeding breast. Wertvold endeavoured to recall her to recollection, but for a long time vain were his attempts. At length, recovering, "Leave me," she cried, "leave me to die with my murdered father. Away! Anguish not my breast. Abandoned by heaven, leave me to die and receive the punishment of my guilt." "You rave, Arilda. See, the vassals of the Baron draw near. Hark now, their voices are heard. Their torches gleam in the walks. We shall be discovered, Arilda. Let me arouse you from this torpor. Let us fly, Arilda, and save ourselves from an ignominious death." "Away!" cried the distracted maid. I am a wretch unfit to live, more unfit to die, yet I will expiate the foul offence by submitting those tortures that await me, though which exceed not the agonies of my own bosom. Oh, my much-loved father, she exclaimed, your daughter, your own daughter, is your murderer. She fell upon his bosom, and still the blood-plumed knight urged her to fly. Arilda, he returned, what false notions occupy your breast? Rather by penitence expiate the crime. The foul offence is not to be atoned by death. Heaven, in its wrath, has doomed your soul to everlasting torment. Live, then, and by penitence seek to appease its vengeance. What mercy can the wretched murderer of her parent hope for? Leave me, Wertvold. Distraction rages through my brain. I am lost, forever lost. God abandoned, doomed to everlasting torments. O Arilda, think on your spotless fame to be blasted by the scandalizing tongue of futurity. Think on the curses each peasant slave will mutter on her who once her country's boast. The name of Arilda shall be shuddered at by those who judge not the motive but the act. Children shall be rocked to their slumbers with the frightful relation of her guilt, and she shall live forever in the detestation and abhorrence of even the criminal. The pilgrim shall hear and tremble at her tale. The monk shall cross himself and tell his beads when he passes Rhuddlan's blood-stained towers. All nature shall be shocked with her enormities, and not a pitying sigh shall be heaved to her memory. Come, Arilda, let us fly. Penitence shall soon restore peace to your bosom, and your crime shall be forgotten. Oh, no, I will remain and sigh out my last breath on the cold bosom of my father. See, Arilda, the torches advance. Prince Morven is at their head. This way he bends his steps. He has his eyes upon us. Distraction. We are lost. Ah, Morven, comes he hither to witness my shame? Exclaimed the maid. I cannot stand the inquiring glance of his penetrating eye. Then hasten to the coracle, Arilda, which now awaits us on the shore. Haste, Arilda. Hear you not the voices? They approach. They are at our heels. At this moment a number of voices exclaimed, This way! Oh, hide me from them! They come! Cried Arilda, and clasping the hand of Wertvold, she flew to the strand which the coracle was anchored. The footsteps approached, and numberless torches lined the strand. Sir Rizvik was discovered by the vassals of Rhuddlan, wrapped up in his cloak and bathed in his blood. His heart was cold in his bosom. No signs of life animated his cheek that was pale and death-like. His silvery beard was distained and clotted with gore. The last breath had issued from his mouth. Morven had the corpse borne to the castle, where it lay in state for 3 days, when it was deposited in the earth, and 500 masses were sung for his eternal repose. In the meantime, the despairing Arilda, having set her foot on board the vessel, was borne over the thin wave with the rapidity of lightning. Torches still lined the stand, and in their glaring light it was reflected to the opposite shore, breaking through the horrible darkness that clouded the earth. Vain is your flight, murderess, whispered a voice in the breeze. Mountains cannot conceal your guilt, or cover you from the wrath of the great avenger. To the furthermost corner of the world, the retributive sword of justice shall pursue you. Hark! Cried Arilda, clinging to the bosom of her seducer, while horror distorted her countenance. Hark! Heard you not a voice? Oh, Wertvold, hide me! She buried her face in her cloak, while the warrior knight maintained a contemptuous silence. At length, gazing upon her with satisfaction, he exclaimed, And is Arilda mine? Do I now press her in my arms? Do I now hold her to my heart, beyond the power of man to tear her from me? Why, this, indeed, is triumph. She is mine, voluntarily mine. She has fled her paternal roof for me, an unknown. She has rejected Morven, the heir apparent to the crown of Wales, who came to her with a heart full of love, and proffered the wealth of his country at her feet, to share her smiles for me, an unknown. She has renounced her claim to virtue, embraced infamy for a spotless name, has preferred the blast of scandal to the mild breath of praise, and all this for me, an unknown. A horrible smile, as he concluded, played upon his cheek. Arilda started from his bosom. Wertvold, she exclaimed, do you upbraid me? Enamoured beauty, no, to me this guilt is pleasure. Had you deluged the world in a sea of blood, or brought another chaos on the earth, Wertvold would have smiled. For heaven's sake, cried the almost expiring criminal, tell me, who are you? The warrior knight of the blood-red plume, but, he continued, Erilda is beyond the reach of mercy. It is inevitably mine. I will reveal myself in all my glowing colors. I am an agent of the great infernal. My residence is in the bosom of the Clivid. My occupation is to aggravate the crimes on earth, and be the great instigator of war and rapine. In my bosom spring those seeds of faction which I scatter in the breasts of princes, urging them to raise the sword against each other's life, and plunge in each other's nation in a torrent of destructive war. But this had ceased. Morven's father had restored Wales to prosperity and peace, and I, in the bosom of my native stream, was doomed to sleep and brood new boils and painful inactivity. While thus my mind was occupied with thought, an incubus approached my oozy bed, and breathed Erilda's fame into my ear. I was aroused with the sweet image my fancy drew, and on beholding the enchanting object, found her sweeter than my imagination had painted her, and from that moment I resolved to make her mine. I heard of her many virtues, of her piety, and what a feeling heart she boasted. This news instructed me with what shape to assume, and the warrior knight of the blood-red plume answered every purpose. Erilda was easily ensnared. She pitied me because she thought me unfortunate. Pity instantly begat love. Love, the glowing fire of all-consuming passion. I had no power to deceive, but speciously. "Monster!" cried the frantic wretch. "You were all deception." "There Erilda wrongs me," cried the fiend. "She deceived herself. She thought me what her heart hoped I was. I did not need much art to gain her. She readily entered into all my views, embraced my projects as fast as they were uttered." Erilda threw herself upon her knees. "Nay, prayer is vain," continued the fiend. "You are lost to heaven. You scrupled to commit an immediate murder, yet planned a lingering death for the parent who had nurtured you. You would not stab, but preferred planting daggers in your father's bosom. Murderess, you bid him who gave you life live for a time in agony to reflect on his daughter's infamy." Erilda shrunk with horror and affright from the hideous monster, who now resumed his original shape amidst the yell of demons who rose from the sandy deep upon the curling wave to greet their chief. The eyes of the sanguinary fiend, emitting a sulphureous flame, were fixed upon the pale countenance of the guilty maid, whom he grasped round the waist in malignant triumph. Green scales covered his body. From his mouth and nostrils he breathed the white frothen waters, and varying animals, fostered by the liquid element, trailed their pestiferous slime across his carcass. In his right hand he held a trident, which he raised on high to plunge into the bosom of his victim, who, screaming, burst from his embrace, and, falling upon her knees, implored of heaven protection. Loud thunders shook the sky, terrific lightning flashed in her eyes, and the furious winds, bursting through the mountains, swelled the agitated river beyond its bounds. The fiend, with malignant yell, pursued Erilda. The trident entered her bosom, and crimson torrents of her virgin blood gushed from the yawning wound. In agony she fell. The demon, twining his hand in her fair locks, hurled her to the deep, and, sated with triumph, vanished with his coracle. Long time did the white-browed waves bear up Erilda. In her last moments she beheld the pale spectre of Sir Reswick, who was advancing upon the rolling waters that seemed to shrink from his feet, placing his forefinger to the deep wound in his breast. More dreadful were her screams, and billow succeeding billow bore her near the shore. Struggling for life, she clung to a loose rock to save herself, which, yielding to her grasp, came rolling down and crashed her to pieces. The hermit paused. "Since then, has Ridlin's castle been the seat of anarchy? Monarchs, indeed, have made it their residence, but each night Erilda's screams are heard, and the warrior of the blood-red plume is seen pursuing her through the ruined courts. Such is the tale of Ridlin's ruined towers, pilgrim. Go thy way, stop not within its blasted walls. Foul fiends ride upon the misty air, and the demons of the angry Clivid claim it as their right."